Hey, welcome back. It's Alex here, and I am so glad you pressed play today, because this episode is about something that happens to every single one of us, every single day, and most of the time we don't even notice it happening. Have you ever said something to a friend, something you were a little nervous about, and then you watched their face, and you just knew, before they even said a word, that they agreed with you? Or maybe the opposite happened. You said something, and the other person said, "Yeah, sure," but something about the way they said it made you feel like they didn't really mean it at all. That gap, that space between the words people use and what they actually feel, that's what we are going to explore today. And I promise you, by the end of this episode, you are going to hear English conversations in a completely different way. You're going to start noticing the small words, the little sounds, the short phrases that native speakers use to say, "Yes, I'm with you," or "I've got your back," or "That's exactly right." These signals are everywhere, but they're quiet. They hide inside conversations. And today, we are going to pull them out into the light, one by one, through a story that I think you're going to enjoy. Every language has its own version of this, its own quiet system of little words and sounds that tell you whether someone truly means what they're saying, but English has such a wide, colorful range of them that it can feel almost overwhelming at first, especially if you learned most of your English from textbooks that only ever taught you "yes" and "I agree." Real conversations are so much richer than that, and today we're going to open that door together. So here's what I want you to do before we start. Just relax. You don't need a pen, you don't need a notebook, although you can grab one if that helps you. All you need to do is listen and let the story carry you. I'm going to show you the language naturally, the way it actually happens between real people, not in some robotic textbook dialogue. And along the way, I'll pause here and there to point things out, to ask you a question, to give you a moment to repeat something out loud. Speaking the words yourself, even quietly, even just moving your lips, helps your brain remember them so much better than just listening alone. So don't be shy. If I ask you to say something, go ahead and say it. Even if you're on a bus, even if you're cooking dinner, even if you're lying in bed with your eyes closed. Your mouth needs the practice as much as your ears do. All right, let's begin. Our story today takes us to a small town on the coast, a place with gray stone houses, narrow streets, and a harbor full of fishing boats that creak and knock against each other when the wind picks up. Seagulls wheel constantly overhead, calling out to one another, and in the early mornings, mist rolls in off the water and sits over the rooftops until the sun finally burns it away. The town is called Dunmore Bay, and it sits on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, where the water is cold and the mornings are foggy, and everything smells like salt. Our main character is a young man named Thomas. Thomas grew up in Porto, in Portugal, right by the river, and for most of his life the ocean was warm and blue and full of sunshine. But 3 weeks ago, Thomas packed 2 suitcases, said goodbye to his mother at the airport, and flew to Ireland to start a new job at a small marine research center in Dunmore Bay. He had studied biology at university, and this job, this chance to study seals and seabirds and the strange creatures that live along the rocky coastline, was something he had wanted for years. But wanting something, and actually doing it, actually moving to a new country, where you don't know a single person, That's a different kind of feelin' altogether. And on his first morning walkin' to the research center, with the wind pulling at his jacket and the rain threatening to start any minute, Thomas felt his stomach tighten with nerves. The research center was a low white building right at the edge of the harbor, with big windows facing the water and a faded blue door that stuck a little when you pushed it. Paint peeled slightly around the window frames, and a small hand-painted sign above the entrance read, Dunmore Bay Marine Research Center. The letters faded from years of salt wind and rain. Tomas pushed the door twice before it finally opened, and he stepped inside to find a woman standing by a desk, holding a mug of tea in both hands, like she was trying to warm her fingers. She had short red hair, glasses pushed up on her head, and she looked up the moment the door creaked. "You must be Thomas," she said, putting the mug down and walking over with her hand out. "I'm Fiona. I run this place, or at least I tried to." "Nice to meet you," Thomas said, shaking her hand. "The door is a bit difficult." Fiona laughed. "Tell me about it. I've been asking someone to fix that door for 2 years now." Now here's something I want you to notice already, right at the very start. Fiona didn't just say, "Yes, the door is broken." She said, "Tell me about it," which is actually a really common way that English speakers show strong agreement, especially when someone complains about something they've also experienced. It doesn't mean she literally wants Thomas to tell her about the door. It means, "I completely understand. I've experienced exactly the same thing." So if your friend says, "This weather is terrible," and you've been thinking the exact same thing for days, you could say, "Tell me about it." And your friend will immediately feel like you're on the same page. Try saying that out loud right now. Tell me about it. Notice how casual and warm it sounds, almost like a small joke between two people who understand each other. Fiona showed Thomas around the building, pointing out the small kitchen with its ancient kettle, the lab room with tanks of seawater and microscopes lined up on long tables, and finally, the office where he would be working, a room with 2 desks facing the harbor. At the second desk sat a man with dark skin and a friendly, relaxed face, wearing a thick green sweater and typing something on his laptop. "This is Dayon," Fiona said. "He's been with us for about 4 years now. Knows everything there is to know about the seal colonies here." Dion stood up and shook Thomas's hand firmly. "Good to finally meet you, man. Fiona's been talking about you for weeks." "All good things, I hope?" Thomas said, trying to sound relaxed, even though his nerves were still there, sitting quietly in his chest. "Oh, absolutely," Dayon said, grinning. "She said you did some incredible work on seabird migration back in Portugal. We need that kind of experience around here." There it is again. Did you catch it? Absolutely. This is one of the strongest, clearest ways to agree with someone in English. It's stronger than just saying yes. When someone says absolutely, they are telling you there is 0 doubt in their mind. They completely and fully agree with what you said. You'll hear it constantly in English conversations, especially when someone wants to show real enthusiasm, not just polite agreement. Compare the difference between someone saying, "Yeah, I guess so," which sounds unsure and half-hearted, and someone saying, "Absolutely," which sounds confident and genuine. The word itself carries energy. Try saying it with a little bit of a smile in your voice. Absolutely. Feel how different that sounds from a flat, quiet, "yes." On that very first afternoon, Before Thomas had even unpacked a single box in his new office, Fiona gathered the small team together in the kitchen for what she called a proper welcome, which turned out to mean strong tea, slightly burnt toast, and a long, relaxed conversation about the work ahead. Dion pulled out a chair for Thomas and told him not to worry about learning everything at once. Honestly, it took me about 6 months before I stopped feeling lost every single day, Dion said, stirring sugar into his tea. So don't be too hard on yourself. That's reassuring, actually, Thomas said. I was starting to feel like everyone here already knew everything, and I was miles behind. Nah, we've all been there, Dion said. Right, Fiona? Oh, for sure, Fiona said, laughing. I cried in the supply closet during my second week here. True story. You did not, Dion said, grinning. I absolutely did, Fiona said. Ask anyone who worked here back then. Now here's a small detail worth noticing, the way Fiona used for sure so casually in that moment. For sure is another relaxed, friendly way of agreeing with someone, very similar in strength to definitely, but it feels a little lighter, a little more conversational. You'll hear it constantly among friends, especially younger speakers, but really, people of all ages use it in casual settings. If someone asks, "Are you coming to the party this weekend?" you might simply say, "For sure." And that tells them, without any doubt, that yes, you're planning to be there. Try it now, nice and relaxed. For sure. Let your voice drop slightly at the end, the way people naturally do when they're being casual and confident at the same time. Later that same week, on a quiet Thursday evening, the whole team gathered around Fiona's desk to talk about weekend plans, since Dion had suggested they all go out to a small pub near the harbor to properly welcome Thomas to the team. So, everyone free Saturday night? Dion asked, looking around. Count me in, Fiona said immediately, not even looking up from her computer screen. Sounds good to me, Thomas added, feeling a small warm rush of happiness at being included so naturally. Count me in is a wonderful little phrase, and I think you're going to like using it, because it's short, friendly, and instantly clear. It means, include me. I want to be part of this. It works perfectly for invitations, plans, group activities, almost any situation where someone is organizing something, and you want to confirm your interest with real enthusiasm. Try saying it now. Count me in. Notice how it almost sounds like you're stepping forward, raising your hand, saying, yes, add my name to the list. And sounds good to me is slightly different. It's a relaxed way of agreeing with a plan or a suggestion, almost like saying, that works for me. I have no objections. It's incredibly common in everyday English, whether you're agreeing to a restaurant choice, a meeting time, or a weekend outing. Practice both phrases now, one after the other. Count me in. Sounds good to me. Feel the difference in energy. One is a little more excited, the other a little more calm and easy. That Saturday night at the pub, sitting around a small wooden table with a fire crackling nearby, Thomas found himself laughing more than he had in weeks. Dion told stories about seals stealing fish directly out of fishermen's nets, and Fiona described, in dramatic detail, the time a curious dolphin had followed the research boat for nearly 2 hours, refusing to leave, no matter what they tried. Thomas shared a few stories of his own, about the seabird colonies back in Portugal, about his grandmother's kitchen, about how strange it still felt to see the sun set so early here compared to home. I have to say, Fiona said, raising her glass slightly, I think you're going to fit in really well here, Thomas. You can say that again, Dayon said, raising his own glass. You can say that again is a fun, expressive way to strongly agree with someone, almost like saying, "That's so true. I completely agree. It's worth repeating." It has a playful energy to it, often used among friends in relaxed, happy moments, exactly like this one at the pub. If a friend says, "This cake is amazing," and you agree completely, you might respond, "You can say that again," instead of a plain, "Yes, it is." Try it now, with a smile in your voice. You can say that again. It's the kind of phrase that makes conversations feel warm and alive, rather than flat and predictable. Over the next few days, Tomas began settling into his new routine. Every morning he walked from his small rented apartment above a bakery, down the hill, past the church with its crooked steeple, and along the harbor wall to the research center. The bakery, it turned out, was owned by a woman named Priya, who had moved to Dunmore Bay from Mumbai almost 15 years earlier, and now made the best cinnamon bread Thomas had ever tasted, which was saying something because his own grandmother used to bake in Porto, and he had always thought nobody could beat her recipes. One morning, as Thomas stopped to buy bread before work, Priya asked him how he was settling in. "It's good," Thomas said. "Different from Portugal, obviously. Colder, wetter, but good." Priya laughed warmly. "Give it time. Everyone says that in their first month. Then one day you wake up and you realize you've stopped noticing the rain." "I hope you're right," Tomas said. "I know I'm right," Priya said, wrapping his bread in paper. "I've seen it happen to dozens of people who move here. You'll see." "That makes sense," Thomas said, and he genuinely meant it, because something about her confidence made him believe her. Now, "That makes sense" is a phrase I really want you to hold on to, because it's incredibly useful and incredibly common, especially when you want to show that you understand and agree with someone's reasoning, not just their opinion. It's different from saying, "I agree," because "that makes sense" focuses on the logic behind what someone said. You're telling them, "I understand why you think that, and it's logical, it's reasonable." You can use it in so many situations. If a colleague explains why a project is delayed, you might say, "That makes sense." If a friend explains why they're upset about something, "That makes sense" shows you understand their feelings are reasonable. Go ahead and practice it now. Say it slowly. "That makes sense." Then say it a little faster, the way people actually say it in real conversation. "That makes sense." Don't worry about sounding too fast at first. Just get comfortable with the rhythm. During his second week at the research center, Dion offered to take Thomas out to see the seal colony for the first time, up close, from the small research boat the team used for their fieldwork. They set off early one clear morning, the water calm and silver under a pale sky, and as they rounded the north point, Dion cut the engine and let the boat drift quietly toward the rocks. "There," Dion whispered, pointing toward a cluster of gray shapes lying along the flat rocks near the waterline. "That's most of the colony right there. About 40 of them at the moment, give or take." Thomas leaned forward, watching as one of the seals lifted its head lazily, glanced at the boat, and then went right back to sleep, entirely unbothered. "They're bigger than I expected," he said quietly. "Yeah, everyone says that the first time," Dayon said, smiling. "Wait until you see one up close on land." They look almost clumsy when they're moving on the rocks, but the second they hit the water, it's like watching a completely different animal. Fast, graceful, powerful. I can't wait to see that, Tomas said. You will, don't worry, Dayon said. Give it a few weeks. Once you're out here more regularly, you'll start recognizing individual seals. Some of them have scars or markings that make them easy to tell apart. There's one big male, we call him Captain, who's been coming back to this same rock for the 6 years I've been recording this colony. Captain, Tomas repeated, smiling. I like that. Fiona named him, Dayon said, laughing quietly so as not to disturb the colony. Said he swims around the harbor like he owns the place. They stayed out on the water for almost 2 hours that morning, drifting quietly, taking notes, listening to the strange low calls the seals made to one another, sounds that Thomas hadn't expected, somewhere between a bark and a moan, carrying easily across the still water. Dion explained how the underwater microphones recorded these calls constantly, day and night, building a picture over time of how the colony communicated, how mothers called to their pups, how the seals seemed to recognize each other's individual voices the way humans do. It's incredible work, Tomas said, as they finally turned the boat back toward the harbor. I mean, I studied this kind of thing in university, but seeing it like this, it's completely different. That's exactly why I love this job, Dayon said. Books can only teach you so much. The real understanding happens out here, on the water, paying attention. Thomas nodded slowly, watching the colony shrink behind them as the boat picked up speed. He thought about how strange it was that just 2 weeks earlier he had known none of this, none of these people, nothing about this particular stretch of coastline, and now here he was, already feeling a quiet, growing sense of belonging, already learning to recognize the voice of a seal named Captain. It was a small moment, but it stayed with him, one of those early memories that, looking back later, he would recognize as the exact point where Dunmore Bay stopped feeling like somewhere he was staying and started feeling like somewhere he actually lived. As the weeks passed, Tomas grew closer to his new colleagues. He learned that Fiona had run the research center for almost 8 years, ever since the previous director retired, and that she cared about the place with a kind of fierce, protective love that Thomas found both admirable and a little intimidating. He learned that Dion had grown up just outside Dunmore Bay, in a village a few miles down the coast, and that he knew every rock and cave and hidden beach in the area, because his grandfather had been a fisherman and had taken him out on the water since he was 6 years old. And slowly, Thomas began to feel less like a stranger and more like someone who actually belonged there, someone whose opinion mattered when the team discussed their research. But then, about 6 weeks into Thomas's time in Dunmore Bay, something happened that would test the whole team, and it's here that our story really starts to move. It began with a weather forecast. Fiona came into the office one gray Tuesday morning, her face tighter than usual, holding her phone out in front of her. "There's a storm coming," she said. "A big one. It's supposed to hit on Friday night, and the forecasters are saying it could be the worst one we've seen here in years." Dion leaned back in his chair, frowning. "How bad are we talking?" "Bad enough that I'm worried about the equipment on the North Point," Fiona said. "The recording stations, the underwater microphones, all of it. If the storm surge is as high as they're predicting, we could lose everything out there. The equipment she was talking about had taken the team almost a year to install. It tracked the movement and sounds of the seal colony that lived along the rocky point north of the harbor, and it had produced some of the most important data the research center had ever collected. Losing it would not just mean losing expensive machinery. It would mean losing months, maybe years, of research that couldn't easily be repeated. "We need to get out there and secure everything before Friday," Fiona said. "Move what we can to higher ground, reinforce what we can't move, and hope for the best with the rest." Thomas felt a small flicker of fear in his stomach, the kind you feel when you realize something important is at risk, and you're not sure if there's enough time to fix it. But he also felt something else, something stronger, a kind of determination that surprised him a little. "I'm in," he said. "Whatever you need, I'll help." "Me too," Dayon said immediately. "You know I'm not letting that storm take my seals without a fight." Fiona smiled, just slightly, the first real smile Thomas had seen from her all morning. "I knew you two would say that. All right, let's make a plan. Now, pause with me here for a second, because I want to point something out. When Thomas said, 'I'm in,' that's a short, casual, very common way to agree to join something, to say yes to a plan or an activity. It's the kind of phrase you'd use with friends or colleagues, not usually in a very formal situation, but it carries a lot of enthusiasm in just 2 words. "I'm in." Try saying it now, like you're agreeing to help a friend move apartments or join a weekend trip. "I'm in." Notice how confident and quick it sounds. It's the opposite of hesitation. For the rest of that day, the 3 of them sat around the small table in the office, going over maps of the North Point, making lists of equipment, and calculating how many trips they would need to make before Friday. It was slow, careful work, and more than once, Dion would suggest something, and Fiona would respond with a firm nod and say, "Right, that's exactly what I was thinking." Or Thomas would point out a problem with the plan, and Fiona would say, "Good catch, you're totally right. We need to fix that." At one point, Dion tapped the map with his finger and looked up. "I think we should move the smaller station first, before we even touch the bigger ones. It's closer to the cliff edge, so it's more exposed." "Exactly," Fiona said, nodding firmly. "Precisely what I was going to suggest. That one's the most vulnerable, no question." Exactly and precisely are 2 more strong, confident agreement words, and they work almost the same way, telling someone, "You are completely correct. There is nothing to add or change." Precisely feels just slightly more formal, a touch more careful and exact, while exactly is a little more common in everyday speech. But honestly, you can use them fairly interchangeably in most situations. If a colleague summarizes a problem perfectly, you might say, "Exactly, that's the issue." Or, in a more formal meeting, "Precisely, that's the core of it." Try saying both now. Exactly, precisely. Notice how firm and final they both sound, like a door closing gently but confidently. Thomas, still a little unsure of himself in these early team discussions, hesitated before adding his own thought. "I was also wondering, should we maybe ask Cormac about the tides? He probably knows this coastline better than any weather report could tell us." Fiona's face lit up. "Now that is a brilliant idea. I hear you completely. And honestly, I should have thought of that myself. Cormac's been fishing these waters for 40 years. I hear you. is such a warm, human phrase, and I want you to really notice how it's used here. It doesn't just mean, I heard your words. It means, I understand you, I recognize what you're saying, and I take it seriously. It shows real listening, real respect for the other person's idea or feeling. You'll hear it used both to agree with practical suggestions, like in this scene, and also to show emotional understanding. For example, if a friend tells you they're stressed about work, you might say, I hear you. That sounds really tough. Try practicing it now with two different tones. First, a practical tone, agreeing with an idea. I hear you. Now, a softer, more emotional tone, showing empathy. I hear you. Same words, but the feeling underneath can change completely depending on the situation. Dion leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, clearly pleased with how the plan was coming together. No doubt about it. If we get Cormac involved, we'll have a much better sense of when the tide's going to be at its worst. That man knows this water better than the weather service does. No doubt about it is another strong way to express certainty and agreement, and you'll often hear it used when someone feels very confident about a fact or an opinion, almost removing any possible room for disagreement. It's similar in strength to absolutely or definitely, but it has a slightly more serious, thoughtful tone to it. Imagine someone says, that restaurant downtown is the best in the whole town. And you completely agree. You might respond, no doubt about it. Try saying it now, slowly, with real conviction. No doubt about it. Let the confidence show in your voice. They called Cormac that same evening, and after listening to their plan, he offered a few small adjustments, suggesting they secure the equipment slightly higher up the rocks than they had originally planned, based on tide patterns he had watched his entire life. Honestly, that makes so much more sense than what we had, Fiona said, scribbling notes quickly. Fair enough. Let's redo the placement diagram based on what he said. Fair enough is a really useful phrase, and it's a little different from the others we've talked about so far, because it often shows agreement mixed with a small amount of reconsideration, like you're accepting a new idea or a change of plan, even if it means adjusting something you had already decided. It's a very reasonable, open-minded way to respond. If someone challenges your opinion with a good point, and you accept that they're right, you might say, fair enough, I hadn't thought of it that way. Try it now, in a calm, thoughtful voice. Fair enough. It doesn't need to sound excited, just genuine and open. By this point, Tomas was beginning to feel more and more comfortable speaking up in these discussions, something that surprised him a little considering how nervous he had felt just weeks earlier. I really think this new plan is stronger, he said, especially now that we're accounting for the tide properly. Couldn't have said it better myself, Dayon said, giving him an approving nod. I second that, Fiona added, already reaching for her jacket. Right, let's get moving. We've got a lot of ground to cover before Friday. Both couldn't have said it better myself. And I second that are wonderful, slightly more expressive ways to show strong agreement, and they both work beautifully when someone else has just said something that perfectly matches your own thinking. Couldn't have said it better myself literally means you expressed that exact thought so well I couldn't improve on it, and it's often used with a tone of genuine admiration or appreciation. I second that comes originally from formal meetings where people would vote and second a motion to support it. But today, It's used casually all the time, simply meaning, I fully support what was just said. Try both now. Couldn't have said it better myself. I second that. Notice how naturally these fit into a moment where a team is working well together, supporting each other's ideas. Let's slow down on that last one for a moment. You're totally right. This is such a natural, warm way to agree with someone, especially when they've noticed something important that maybe others missed. Totally adds intensity to the agreement, almost like saying completely or 100%. If someone says totally right, they're not just agreeing, they're agreeing with real conviction. You might also hear people just say totally by itself, as a quick, casual response. Imagine a friend says, I think we should leave earlier to avoid traffic. And you simply respond, totally. That one word carries all the agreement you need. Try it a few times, with different tones. Say it quickly and casually. Totally. Like you're texting a friend. Now say it a little more thoughtfully. Like you're really considering what they said before agreeing. Totally. Both are correct, but the tone changes the feeling slightly. By Wednesday afternoon, word had spread around Dunmore Bay that the research center needed help preparing for the storm. And this is one of my favorite parts of the story, because it shows something beautiful about small communities, something you'll notice in towns like this all over the world. People started showing up. Priya closed the bakery early and arrived with a box of sandwiches and a thermos of hot tea, saying she couldn't do much with equipment, but she could at least make sure nobody worked on an empty stomach. A retired fisherman named Cormac, who Thomas had only met once before, showed up with ropes and tarps from his own boat shed, saying the equipment out on the point reminded him of his old nets, and he wasn't about to let the sea take something without a fight either. Are you sure you don't mind helping? Thomas asked Cormac, feeling a little surprised by how quickly people were volunteering their time. Mind? Cormac said, laughing a deep, rough laugh. Son, I've lived by this water my whole life. Of course I don't mind. Whatever you need, just say the word. Whatever you need, just say the word, is another lovely phrase you'll hear often in English, especially from people who want to offer strong, open support. It means, I'm ready to help in any way. Just tell me what to do. It's warm, generous, and shows a real willingness to be useful without needing lots of explanation. If a friend is going through a hard time and you want to offer help without being pushy, you could say, just say the word and I'll be there. Practice saying it slowly first. Just say the word. Then try it again with a little more warmth in your voice, like you're really speaking to someone you care about. By Thursday evening, the North Point looked like a small army had been at work. Wooden stakes reinforced with rope held down the sensitive recording equipment. Waterproof covers, borrowed from Cormac's fishing gear, wrapped around the most delicate instruments. The team had moved 2 of the smaller recording stations to higher ground entirely, carrying them up the rocky path in the cold wind, their hands numb, their jackets soaked from the sea spray. Standing at the top of the cliff, looking out at the darkening sky and the waves already growing rougher, Fiona turned to the small group around her. Thomas, Dayon, Priya, and Cormac, all exhausted, all wet, all a little proud of what they had accomplished. I really think we've done everything we can, she said. I don't know if it'll be enough, but I think we gave it our best shot. I'm with you on that, Dion said quietly, looking out at the water. I couldn't agree more, Thomas added. Now these two phrases, I'm with you on that, and I couldn't agree more, are two of the strongest ways in English to show complete agreement. And I want to break them down carefully because they're a little more advanced but incredibly useful once you understand them. I'm with you on that means I feel exactly the same way you do. I support your opinion completely. It has a slightly emotional quality to it, like you're standing beside someone, supporting them, not just intellectually agreeing, but emotionally connecting with what they said. I couldn't agree more is a bit different. It's a way of saying, it would be impossible for me to agree with you any more than I already do, because I agree completely. It's a strong, confident phrase, often used when someone makes a point that you feel very strongly matches your own thinking. Try practicing both. First, I'm with you on that, said slowly, with warmth. Then, I couldn't agree more, said with confidence, almost like you're closing a discussion, because there's simply nothing left to argue about. Both phrases work beautifully in serious conversations, in work meetings, and in emotional moments between friends. That night, the storm arrived exactly as predicted, maybe even a little worse. Thomas lay awake in his small apartment above the bakery, listening to the wind howling against the windows, listening to the rain hitting the glass in waves, and thinking about the equipment out on the point, about all the work the team had put in, about whether it would survive the night. He barely slept, and when the first gray light of morning finally came, he pulled on his boots and his heaviest coat and walked down to the harbor, where he found Fiona and Dion already standing, staring out at the water, both looking as tired and anxious as he felt. "Any news?" Thomas asked. "Nothing yet," Fiona said. "We can't get out to the point until the wind dies down a bit more. It's still too dangerous." They waited. It felt like the longest morning of Thomas's life, sitting in the office with mugs of tea going cold in their hands, watching the wind slowly begin to calm outside the windows. Around 11 o'clock, Fiona finally stood up. "All right," she said, "let's go see what's left." The walk out to the North Point was different this time. The path was muddy and slippery, littered with broken branches and seaweed that had been thrown up by the enormous waves during the night. The air still smelled sharply of salt and rain, and gulls circled overhead, crying out as though they too were anxious to see what remained. Tomas's boots sank into the soft ground with every step, and his heart was pounding as they came around the final bend in the path, and the recording stations came into view. For a moment, nobody said anything. The scene in front of them was a mix of damage and survival. One of the smaller stations, the one they hadn't been able to move, had been knocked over, its casing cracked, water clearly having gotten inside. But the two larger stations, the ones they had spent all of Thursday reinforcing with stakes and rope and Cormac's tarps, stood exactly where they had left them, battered by the storm, but intact. Dion let out a huge breath, almost a laugh. "I don't believe it. It actually held." "We did it," Fiona said, and there was real emotion in her voice now, relief mixed with exhaustion. "We actually did it." "See, I told you we could pull this off," Thomas said, feeling a grin spread across his own face despite how tired he was. "You did tell us that," Fiona said, turning to him with a warm smile. And you were right. Good call, insisting we reinforce those two stations first, instead of trying to save everything at once. Good call is a short phrase you'll hear all the time in English, especially in work situations or team settings, when someone wants to praise a decision or a suggestion someone else made. It's a compact way of saying, that was a smart decision, that was the right choice. If a friend suggests taking an earlier bus and you avoid heavy traffic because of it, you might say later, good call, suggesting that. It's casual, quick, and it shows genuine appreciation for someone's judgment. Try saying it now. Good call. Short, confident, warm. They spent the rest of that day carefully checking the equipment, drying out what they could, and beginning repairs on the smaller station that had been damaged. It was tiring work, but there was a lightness in the air now, a kind of happy exhaustion that comes after you've faced something difficult together and come out the other side. Every so often, one of them would stop, look out at the calm gray sea, so different now from the violent water of the night before, and just shake their head in quiet disbelief at how quickly nature could shift from destruction to peace. Around sunset, they walked back into town, tired and salt-crusted, boots heavy with mud, and found that Priya had kept the bakery open late, with a small table set up in the corner, plates of warm bread and cheese waiting, along with Cormac, who had brought a bottle of something strong that he insisted they all needed after the week they'd had. "To the team," Cormac said, raising his glass, "and to that storm, which clearly underestimated the lot of you." "Hear, hear," Fiona said, laughing. "Hear, hear" is a fun little phrase, often used when people want to strongly agree with something someone just said, especially during a toast or a celebration. It comes from a much older tradition, but today it simply means, I completely agree, well said. You'll hear it a lot at dinners, celebrations, and any moment where someone says something that everyone in the group agrees with wholeheartedly. Try saying it now. Maybe even raise an imaginary glass while you do. Hear, hear. It has a fun, slightly old-fashioned charm to it, but people still use it very naturally today. As the evening went on, sitting around that small table with warm bread and tired muscles, and a feeling of real friendship settling over the group, Tomas found himself thinking about how strange life could be. Just 6 weeks earlier, he had been a stranger in this town, nervous and unsure, struggling to push open a stubborn blue door. And now here he was, surrounded by people who had shown up for him, who had trusted him, who had worked alongside him through one of the hardest weeks of his new job, and who now sat laughing with him like old friends. "You know," Tomas said, looking around the table, "I wasn't sure about moving here at first. It felt like such a big risk." "And now?" Priya asked gently. "Now I think it might be the best decision I've ever made," Tomas said. "Sounds like Dunmore Bay got under your skin," Dion said, smiling. "It really did," Tomas said. "You were right, Priya. I did stop noticing the rain." Priya laughed. "Told you so." "Told you so" is such a playful, common phrase, and I think it's a perfect way to bring our story to a close today. It's used when someone predicted something correctly, and now they're gently, often humorously, reminding the other person that their prediction came true. It's not usually mean-spirited. It's often said with a smile, between people who like and trust each other. If a friend warns you that a movie will make you cry, and later you're wiping tears away, they might say, "Told you so," with a little laugh. Try saying it now, with a playful tone. Told you so. Feel how light and friendly it sounds, not harsh at all. Just a little proud, a little amused. A few days after the storm had passed, and the equipment had been checked and rechecked, Thomas finally found a quiet evening to call his mother back in Porto. He hadn't wanted to worry her while everything was happening, but now, sitting on his small couch with a cup of tea going cold beside him, he told her the whole story, from the first warning about the storm to the exhausted, happy dinner at Priya's bakery afterward. "You should have seen everyone, Mai," Thomas said, switching easily between English words he'd picked up and his native Portuguese. "The whole town came out to help, people I'd barely met before." "That doesn't surprise me at all," his mother said. "Small towns are like that everywhere, you know. People show up for each other." "That's so true," Thomas said. "I didn't really believe it until I saw it myself, though. I always thought that kind of community only existed in old stories." "That's so true" is a lovely, gentle way to agree with someone, especially when their comment touches something you feel emotionally, not just logically. It's softer than exactly or absolutely, carrying a quieter, more reflective tone. You'll often hear it in personal conversations, when someone shares an observation about life, relationships, or experience, and you find yourself nodding along, recognizing the truth in what they said. Try saying it now, slowly, thoughtfully. "That's so true." Let a small pause sit before it, the way people often do when something really resonates with them. His mother asked how he was managing with the language, whether he was still finding it difficult to follow fast conversations at work. "Actually, it's getting so much easier," Thomas said. "At first, I understood the words people said, but I couldn't always tell if they really meant them or if they were just being polite. Now, I'm starting to notice the difference. Like, if Fiona says, 'Yeah, sure,' in a flat voice, that's different from her saying, 'Absolutely, 100%. The second one means she really, truly agrees." "I know exactly what you mean," his mother said. "It's the same in Portuguese, isn't it? We have our own ways of showing when we really mean something, and when we're just being polite." "Exactly," Thomas said. "I guess every language has its own little signals. You just have to learn to listen for them." Before hanging up, his mother told him how proud she was, and Thomas felt that familiar warmth spread through his chest. The kind of comfort that reminds you home is never really that far away, even across an ocean. 2 weeks after the storm, once the equipment had been fully repaired and the data confirmed safe, Fiona announced that the local community hall was hosting a meeting about long-term storm preparation for the whole harbor area, not just the research center. Fishermen, shop owners, the harbor master, and dozens of residents packed into the small hall on a Tuesday evening, sitting on folding chairs under fluorescent lights, drinking tea from paper cups. Tomas found himself sitting between Priya and Dion, with Cormac just behind them, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The harbor master, a tall, serious woman named Bridget, stood at the front and explained that the town council was considering funding a permanent storm shelter, a small reinforced building on the north point, where equipment, boats, and emergency supplies could be kept safe during future storms. "We saw 2 weeks ago what a difference proper preparation makes," Bridget said, looking around the room. The research center's equipment survived because a team of people worked together for days beforehand. Imagine if the whole harbor had that kind of shelter ready to go. Spot on, Cormac called out from the back, nodding firmly. That storm could have taken half the boats in this harbor if we hadn't hauled them up in time. A proper shelter would save us all a lot of grief. Spot on is a lovely, very British and Irish way of saying exactly right. That's precisely correct. It's short, warm, and a little informal, often used when someone makes a point that perfectly captures the truth of a situation. If a friend explains exactly why a plan didn't work, and you completely agree with their explanation, you might say, "Spot on, that's exactly it." Try saying it now, nice and relaxed. Spot on. It has a friendly, approving kind of energy, almost like a pat on the back in word form. Fiona stood up next, holding a folder of notes about the research center's experience during the storm. I want to say, from our perspective, having that kind of shared shelter would make an enormous difference. We nearly lost data that took us a full year to collect, simply because we didn't have anywhere safe nearby to move things quickly. "Same here," said a man near the front, who Thomas recognized as the owner of one of the fishing boats down by the pier. "Lost part of my engine last year, because I couldn't get everything under cover in time. This isn't just about the research center. It's about all of us." "Same here" is a simple, direct way to agree by sharing your own similar experience. It's a little like saying, "That happened to me too," or "I feel exactly the same way." It works beautifully in conversations where people are comparing experiences, and it creates an instant sense of connection. Because you're not just agreeing in theory, you're showing that you've actually lived through something similar. Try it now. Same here. Keep it simple and honest, the way people naturally say it. Priya raised her hand next, and when Bridget nodded to her, she stood up carefully. "I just want to add, from a business perspective, a storm like that doesn't just damage equipment. It damages people's confidence in living and working here. When the whole town comes together like we did, to help the research center, to help each other, that's worth protecting too. A shelter isn't just about boats and machinery. It's about knowing your neighbors have your back." "You took the words right out of my mouth," Dion said, standing up beside her, nodding seriously. "That's exactly what I was thinking. Just couldn't find the way to say it as well as you just did." "You took the words right out of my mouth" is a wonderful, very human way to express strong agreement, especially in a moment where someone has just expressed a thought or feeling that you were already having, but hadn't said out loud yet. It creates a lovely sense of connection between two people, almost like your minds were thinking the exact same thing at the exact same time. Try saying it slowly now. "You took the words right out of my mouth." Feel how personal and warm that sounds, much more emotional than a simple, "I agree." Bridget smiled and looked around the room. Right. I think we're all on the same page here. It sounds like there's strong support for moving forward with this." Right is a small, quick phrase that native speakers often use while actively listening to someone, showing that they're following along and agreeing at the same time, almost like a verbal nod. You'll hear it a lot in group discussions and meetings, often repeated quickly like this, right, as a way of encouraging the speaker to continue, while also showing agreement with what's already been said. Practice saying it quickly now, the way people naturally do in conversation. Right, right. It's small, but it appears constantly in real spoken English, especially in group settings like this town meeting. Cormac stood up one more time before the meeting moved toward a vote. Look, I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen storms come and go. But I've never seen a town pull together the way this one did a couple weeks back. Whatever this shelter costs, I say we find the money. I'm behind this idea 100%, and I think most people in this room feel the same. I'm behind you 100% is one of the strongest, warmest ways to express full support for a person or an idea in English. It shows total commitment, complete backing, no hesitation at all. You might use it with a friend who's making a difficult decision, telling them, "Whatever you choose, I'm behind you 100%. Or, like Cormac here, you can use it to support a plan or a project you truly believe in. Try saying it now, with real warmth and conviction. I'm behind you 100%. Let your voice carry the sincerity of that support. By the end of the meeting, the room had voted almost unanimously in favor of asking the council to fund the shelter. And as everyone filed out into the cool night air, there was a genuine sense of hope and togetherness that Thomas hadn't expected to feel so strongly, especially not after only 2 months of living in Dunmore Bay. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Priya said, walking beside him toward the bakery, where she had promised everyone tea and leftover pastries. "It really does," Thomas said. "Back home, I don't think I ever went to a town meeting in my life. Here, I've been to one, and I already feel like I understand this place so much better." "That's Dunmore Bay for you," Priya said, smiling. "Small town, big heart." So let's take a moment now to gather everything we've listened to today, because I want you to really lock these phrases into your memory before we finish up. Throughout our story, you heard so many different ways that English speakers signal agreement and support, and I want you to notice something important. They're not all the same strength, and they're not all used in the same situations. Some are strong and confident, like "absolutely," and "I couldn't agree more," and "totally right." These work well when you feel very sure about something, when you want to show real enthusiasm or strong conviction. Others are warmer, more emotional, like "I'm with you on that," or "tell me about it," which show connection and shared feeling, not just intellectual agreement. And then there are the shorter, more casual expressions like "I'm in," "good call," "fair enough," "here, here," and "told you so," which fit naturally into relaxed conversations between friends and colleagues, adding warmth and personality without sounding too formal or stiff. I want you to try something for me now. Think back over the last few days of your own life. Has anyone said something to you that you strongly agreed with? Pause this audio for a moment if you'd like, and imagine that conversation again. But this time, instead of just saying yes, try responding the way our characters did today. Maybe you'd say, "Absolutely, I couldn't agree more." Maybe you'd say, "Tell me about it. That happens to me all the time." Speaking these phrases out loud, even in imaginary conversations, is one of the fastest ways to make them feel natural in your own mouth, instead of just words you recognize when you hear them. Let's actually walk through a few more short situations together, one at a time, nice and slow, so you can build real confidence choosing the right phrase for the right moment. Imagine a coworker turns to you and says, "I really think we should reschedule tomorrow's meeting. Everyone seems too busy this week." How might you respond if you completely agree? You could say, "Fair enough, let's move it," if you want to sound calm and reasonable. Or you could say, "Good call, that makes sense," if you want to show you think it's a smart decision. Or even simply, "Sounds good to me," if you just want to confirm easily and move on. Notice how English gives you so many small choices, and each one carries a slightly different feeling, even though they're all technically saying yes. Now, imagine a different situation. A close friend tells you, "I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately. There's just too much going on at once." This isn't really a moment for something like absolutely or exactly, because those sound a little too logical, a little too much like you're agreeing with a fact rather than supporting a feeling. Instead, you might say something warmer, like, "I hear you," or "I'm with you on that," or even just "same here," if you've been feeling something similar yourself. Do you notice the pattern forming? The stronger, sharper phrases like absolutely and precisely work beautifully for facts, plans, and ideas. The softer, warmer phrases like "I hear you," "I'm with you on that," and "that's so true" work better for feelings, emotions, and personal moments. Once this pattern clicks in your mind, choosing the right phrase becomes so much more natural, almost automatic. Let's try one more. Imagine you're in a group project at work or at school, and someone suggests a new idea that you think is genuinely brilliant, something that solves a problem the whole team has been struggling with. What would you say? Maybe, "Couldn't have said it better myself," if they explained it really clearly. Maybe, "Spot on," if you want something short and warm. Maybe even, "You took the words right out of my mouth," if you had been thinking almost the exact same thing just before they spoke. All three work, and choosing between them really just comes down to your own personal style and how expressive you want to sound in that moment. I also want to remind you that tone matters just as much as the words themselves, maybe even more. You could say "sure" in a flat, bored voice, and it would sound like you don't really care either way. Or you could say the exact same word, "sure," with warmth and a little energy, and suddenly it sounds genuine and friendly. As you keep listening to English shows, podcasts, and conversations, start paying close attention not just to what people say, but how they say it. Listen for where their voice rises with enthusiasm, where it softens with empathy, where it stays flat and neutral. This is something that takes time to develop, but it's honestly one of the most valuable listening skills you can build, because it helps you understand not just the meaning of words, but the real emotional truth underneath them. One more thing before we go, and this is something I think is just as important as the vocabulary itself. Notice how these agreement and support phrases weren't just about words, they were about connection. When Dayon said, "I'm with you on that," he wasn't just agreeing with an idea. He was standing beside Fiona in a difficult moment. When Cormac said, "Whatever you need, just say the word," he wasn't just offering rope and tarps. He was offering his time, his experience, his care for people he barely knew. Language like this carries emotion inside it, and once you start noticing that emotional layer, English conversations will feel so much richer to you, so much more human, instead of just a list of grammar rules and vocabulary to memorize. It's worth mentioning, too, that Thomas's story didn't end with that town meeting. Over the following months, as autumn turned into a cold, windy winter, the research center kept growing, kept collecting data on the seal colony, and kept welcoming visitors who wandered in off the harbor road, curious about the strange, wonderful work happening in that little white building. The town council did eventually approve funding for the shared storm shelter, and by the time spring arrived, a small stone building stood on the north point, sturdy and simple, exactly where the recording stations had once stood, exposed to the wind. Tomas liked to walk past it sometimes on his way to check the equipment, and every time he saw it, he thought about that cold, tense week when a whole town had come together, phrase by phrase, hand by hand, to protect something they all believed mattered. He also stayed close with Dayon, Fiona, Priya, and Cormac, of course. Sunday dinners became something of a tradition among the five of them, rotating between Priya's small flat above the bakery and Fiona's cottage a little further up the hill. Tomas even started teaching Cormac a few words of Portuguese, in exchange for Cormac teaching him the old names fishermen used for the winds and tides along that coast, words passed down through generations, words that carried their own quiet kind of poetry. And whenever Tomas felt homesick, which still happened sometimes, especially around the holidays, he would remind himself of what Priya had told him that very first week. Give it time. One day you stop noticing the rain. She had been right, of course. She usually was. If you enjoyed following Thomas and the team through their storm, and if you want more stories like this one, stories that teach you real, natural English through characters and situations you can actually imagine yourself in, then please take a second right now to hit subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and it means we can keep creating episodes like this one for learners just like you, all around the world. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what's a phrase you use in your own language when you want to strongly agree with someone, or when you want to offer support to a friend? I read every single comment, and I love seeing how different languages express these same human feelings in their own beautiful ways. Before you go, let's do a couple more quick practice rounds together, since a little extra repetition never hurts when you're building new habits in a language. I'm going to describe a short situation, and I want you to say a response out loud, using one of the phrases from today's episode. Ready? Your neighbor tells you, "I think our street really needs better lighting at night. It's quite dark by the bus stop." If you agree completely, what might you say? Perhaps, "No doubt about it," or "spot on," or simply, "I couldn't agree more." All three work perfectly well there. Let's try another one. A colleague says, "I really think we should double-check these numbers before sending the report out." How would you respond if you strongly support that idea? You might say, "Good call," or "Fair enough, let's do that," or even, "I second that." Notice how none of these responses are wrong. English simply gives you a whole toolbox of options, and part of becoming a confident speaker is getting comfortable choosing between them naturally, without stopping to translate in your head first. And one final situation. Imagine an old friend calls you, sounding a little down, and says, "I've just been struggling to stay motivated lately. Nothing feels exciting anymore." This one calls for warmth rather than logic, So you might respond with, I hear you, or I'm with you on that. I've felt that way too. Or simply, same here. Do you feel how differently that response lands compared to something sharp and factual like exactly or precisely? That small shift in phrase choice can make the difference between a conversation that feels cold and mechanical and one that feels genuinely caring and human. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, listening to Thomas and Fiona and Dayon and Priya and Cormac, and for practicing this language right alongside them. Every episode you listen to is helping your English grow stronger, more natural, more confident. One small phrase at a time, one story at a time. Take care of yourself. Keep practicing a little every single day, and I will see you in the next episode. This has been English in Fluency, and I'm Alex. Talk soon.